I'm delighted to introduce Ian Wu. Ian, thank you so much for agreeing to be our first ever podcast on working with creatives. For those of you who don't know Ian's work, he's a distinguished artist and musician based in Singapore. Ian leads the MA Fine Arts program at LaSalle College of the Arts in Singapore. Ian has exhibited globally, and his works are in collections of major institutions such as ABM AMRO, the Singapore Art Museum, the Suzhou Center, National Gallery of Singapore, UBS, and Mint Museum USA, and many others. His paintings are featured in the 2013 publication Art of the New Cities, 21st Century Avant-Gardes, and since 2016, Ian has been part of the experimental painting collaborative project Impermanent Durations on Painting and Time. Ian's work is informed by modernism, by perceptual abstraction, and the sound structures of music improvisation. And they are characterized by a sense of gravitational and representational change. So Ian, thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you.
Can I start off with, well, start off at the beginning do you think you were born creative, or did you learn to be creative?
Yeah, so I think I learned to be creative. That's the straight answer that I'm going to give you. Why do I say that? I think I just wanted to perhaps remove that myth of the idea of creativity being this highly mystical or difficult to put in order. And I think as kids, we all talk about kids being having that, before they have that knowledge of the world, they find their way around the world, and that way of searching, it's a kind of game that they play, and they kind of like construct a world of their own, Of course, there are different kinds of children, and they have their own different ways of dealing with this world, that we live in. And for me, well, I did the same things, and I think the awareness of the self in why do I want to search for this world that I think is maybe better than the current real world that I'm in. I think that only came into me. I think round about when I was 21 years old. So it was a bit late in terms of me getting a sense of what I wanted to do with my life. But better late than never. But once I understood that, and it has to do with a kind of real experience of trying different things, stumbling here and there, and then you question yourself about why you're here, and then as for me, I was making a lot of drawings, and it was particularly one drawing that I made that allowed me to arrive at that awareness. So it is work, For me, it is work that you do, and then you realize this thing called creativity. And actually, before I even want to continue with the rest of the questions, when you first asked me to do this talk about creativity, it was a bit, I always had this odd relationship with the word because I teach in art school. And every time I see this word appearing in handbooks and documents, I feel odd because, I always thought that it was kind of implicit. And maybe I'm thinking that, that word given to artists is, I didn't really understand it, because for an artist, we are very much involved in the micro building of things, in terms, for me, I mean, even if you're making a painting, there are real decisions being made, so it was always a bit difficult for me to sort of like get a sense of how this word relates to me, And then, of course, you talk about the imaginary, which is a word that I try not to use because sometimes it doesn't really describe something that people can understand. Yeah, I don't know whether I answered that question, but I kind of like went around it. Yeah.
That's certainly very helpful.
Mm.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. So you're saying that you don't trust the mythology of the creative artist as a sort of a 19th century myth about, which is linked to genius and it's linked to inborn special divine gifts. So you kind of don't feel comfortable with that idea. Nevertheless, you are comfortable with the idea of having worked towards a refound childhood or childlike, not childish, childlike attitude towards exploration and discovery and putting things together.
Yeah, and I'm still trying to figure that out, actually.
Right. So, yeah. But there is something about in you in seeking to enter again a childlike state of discovery and construction and ideas and the practical action of creating artwork.
Yeah. So what I'm also saying is that, you use the word practical. So I think that the word is important to me because I'm someone that actually needs, I can think about stuff, I have some conceptual ideas that I'm always interested in here and there, but till I actually go into the studio to put things together, I don't trust my ideas. Yeah.
Right.
So I have to put things together before the ideas actually become a bit more concrete. Yeah.
Well, that again is a childlike set of priorities. The child doesn't go to play with the toys with a vast mental apparatus of conceptual ideology. They just like playing with the toys, and they play with the toys.
Till they find out there's a set of instructions that come with the toys, So, it's this whole idea of like, if you didn't have the instructions, you would do it differently,
Yes. So do you like not having the instructions?
I think instructions are interesting. I think depending on who is the one that is setting it. I mean, there are many artists that make a livelihood in terms of giving. Their artwork consists of them giving instructions, very specific instructions, but at the same time that allows groups of people to produce a kind of work there are a kind of limits that are being set, but yet there is kind of also the individuality that can come out of it. I think Solo Red is a very good example of an artist that gives out instructions, that make large drawings on the walls.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I ask you something? You mentioned the word you enjoy doing that. Can I ask you about that sense of enjoyment? When you are working on a piece, I won't use the word creating, when you're working on an artwork, can you say something about your sense of enjoyment of the process of doing it?
Yeah, I always start with putting some marks on a drawing, on a blank piece of paper or a blank surface, and this to me, some artists say that the blank canvas is a very is very kind of like it can be quite demanding, facing a kind of empty space
and intimidating.
But I actually enjoy it. Actually, I enjoy that. I'm going to like put some things on it, and I'm not afraid to do whatever because I know that it is only the beginning, and whatever I do is not going to stay. It's going to change as time goes by. So I that's the best part. In the middle of it is fantastic, and then at some point, now that's when it gets tricky for me. Once that information gets built up, I start to give myself certain instructions and certain laws, certain rules that I've sort of like used. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That's where it gets, for me, I get excited about that, because I can either fail or not, So it's a kind of relationship that one starts to have with a piece of work, It's like you grow a plant,
Yeah. There's a theory amongst experts in creativity, and some of them have called that state that you just described the maze. It's like walking around a maze.
Yeah.
And the best work, the most original, deepest creative work is achieved when you stay in the maze for a long time, and you search around it and you wander around it in a fairly random way sometimes. And what you should not do if you want deep creativity, according to this theory, is you shouldn't try and head for the nearest exit. If you do see an exit, avoid it and stay in the maze. Don't come out of the maze too early. Do those ideas have any resonance for you?
Yeah. Actually, the maze like is a bit of a puzzle. Actually,
yeah.
It's like I sort of like created a kind of game, the lack of a better word, And this game, I'm still giving a kind of instruction. I'm still inventing the instructions for the game, and I'm trying to find its inner logic. So I have this thing about me that I think that my artworks, which are usually based on images and objects, I used to term images and objects so that it kind of like covers a broad range. I mean, they are either a kind of environment that I'm trying to create, or a kind of machine that I'm trying to create.
Right.
So they are like two different things, and these things have systems, And I developed the systems as I go along, and that maze relationship is good. It's a good kind of connection, and the maze is also about getting lost.
Yes, it's getting lost, but there's also got rules to it. It is a structure.
Yeah.
Just whilst driving over this morning to this interview, I heard on the radio an opera singer was talking about her process of performing in an opera. And she said, and when I get into my dressing room before the show and I see all my costume ready and everything's ready to go, I put on one side all the concerns of my everyday life. All of those become irrelevant, because I know that for the next 3 hours, and this is the key phrase that she used, for the next 3 hours, I can do what I was meant to do. I can do what I was meant to do. And that made me, some creative people, but I doubt if you're one of them actually, some creative people say, this is my vocation. This isn't my job. This is my vocation. This is what I was meant to do. And my process of growing up as an artist has been understanding that this is what I was meant to do. Does this resonate with you at all? I kind of doubt it, because you said you learned creativity rather than was born creative. But what do you think?
Yeah. So when you say you use this idea of the opera singer, I also think about the fact that the opera singer may be singing a tune or that's been written by someone else.
Yes.
Yeah. So the opera singer is interpreting a song, and there are certain skill sets or kind of technical virtuosity that are being rendered to deliver it. So she's at the service of the composer, and then to the audience. I think we all do art to communicate. Yeah. So I think that communication thing is, to me, is a very complex thing. It changes from artist to artist. And for a visual artist, there are so many kinds of visual artists. And I see myself a bit like the composer rather than just the deliverer.
Right.
You understand the difference. So for me, the technical aspect of making something, okay, I can do these things. But I think for me, the more important thing is the voice, the idea, the perhaps a kind of integrity of ideas that I've always been interested in and how it's evolving. So that analogy of the composer and is almost like different hierarchies, of
Well,
interpreting, and then the ones that are constructing the music for the opera singer to
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, it's
So one is
been,
more tormented. One is more tormented than the other.
yes. Is one more creative than the other?
I think we are talking about limits, So we are. I think the opera singer is. I'm sure she was made to do these things. We are. She's called to deliver this. I think we all believe that we are called to, at some point in our life. Some of us believe that we are called to deliver this work.
So, and you believe that? You believe that with yourself? That in some sense you were.
Yeah, I
you
do
were meant
believe
to do
that.
it.
I'm a bit like I see myself sometimes like a channel, where things, passes by, and are you able to grasp it? Sometimes you don't, and then you just wait. I think waiting is important.
Yes.
In terms of creativity, which I haven't sort of like gone to yet, but I think it's one of the most important things, and a lot of times we cannot wait, and we rush it. And I think there's a word called you heat it up. You heat up the process, and then I think it doesn't work.
Is Singapore a good place where you can wait?
I'm learning to do it. It's a very interesting question you asked. I live in the city. Singapore is always the city. I'm now living near the beach. I don't know whether you've been to the beach. It's a small beach, but living in the beach has allowed me to see a bit more horizon. Most of the time in Singapore, you don't get to see a full horizon. It's kind of like cropped. So maybe that kind of like influenced the way I make my work as well. So maybe my work will change in the next couple of months, because I'm living in a different space. But I think for Singaporeans, it's really it's speed. Things are moving fast. But COVID has changed a lot. COVID has sort of like, made us wait. You can't plan COVID. You can do your best to do things, to make things happen, that it doesn't listen to you.
So you feel that there is a sense that you were meant to create art, and one of the components
for now.
And so you have a certain kind of responsibility to do that. And one of the components that allows you to do it is a sense of waiting and a sense of allowing things to unfold in their own kind of natural time.
Yeah, what is natural?
Yes.
I mean, you used the word natural time, I think the idea of natural time and waiting is interesting, because why am I waiting? Am I waiting for nature to do something so that I can see it, or I can hear it? We're talking about, I just use the two terms, perception in terms of the visual, and the sonic. And sometimes you can think you want to see something and you put it there, it doesn't work, So you need to wait for the image that is half made to suggest to you. And maybe you need to come back another day, and returning back to your writing on a separate day, returning back to your work a month later. Actually, it's you get a surprise.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're like blind spot, you're like, because it's almost like you are too familiar with yourself. And if you spend too long a time doing banging here and banging there, something is not right. The work is telling you something.
Yes.
So I think it's just being able to be sensitive about that. But human beings, we don't really like that, because we always, have certain deadlines and things like that. Which is why I have like 10 works going on at the same time in my studio. So I know that if I have a show coming up, at least I can pull up a couple of them, that I'm kind of like confident about.
Yeah. Right. Also, I guess, having works concurrently on the go will mean that you can forget about the first one, and whilst you're working on the second, and then when you go back to the first one, it's like looking at it anew, and you can have better perceptions of it.
Yes, it happened many times to me. Yeah.
I know various poets and writers who would say exactly the same, and musicians too. Just on the COVID side, one of the advantages several artists have told me about COVID is that it allows them to, particularly writers, it has allowed them to work solo and work uninterrupted and just concentrate on their own process. And I wondered about what your attitudes to working with other people is, because as a musician, you work with other people. As an artist, you presumably predominantly work alone. And so I wonder how you react to collaboration within creativity.
Yeah, it's a loaded question for me, because I'm going to try and answer this. I think as a musician, my main instrument is the bass guitar. So it's a highly supportive instrument. It's an instrument that is part rhythm and part tonal, and it helps to keep things in check for everyone else to render on top, to do their thing on top of it. So I understand my role, so when I'm making music, my primary instrument has taught me about what is the function of the instrument. Making paintings or objects or artworks, I always ask myself, what is the original function of a picture? I track back what's the first instinct about why do we hang pictures on the wall at a certain height, a certain level. Certain pictures were hung in churches, temples, and then there were pictures that were hung in of course, castles and things. So there are human beings, I mean, for me, pictures are like windows, So there are all these kind of questions that I always refer back to. And of course, you go backwards a little bit more, there is the cave paintings. So for me, understanding this function also means that you know that whatever you make, if I'm talking about visual art, there's a history of people who have done kind of similar things as me, and I'm part of a community. Even if I'm working alone to construct a painting, right, that whatever I'm making, there is a ghost. There are the ghosts of the medium that I'm working with. But of course, hopefully, we don't need to deal with the ghost too much, and then you can just get on with your own thing. But there's always that relationship that is not a bad thing, because without understanding that, then you also you're not aware of what you're doing that is unique, or having that real estate, But it's getting harder and harder. But of course, with the online thing happening and COVID, there is I think there's a kind of possibly a new kind of aesthetic that's going to happen, as time passes by, So I think even though I work in solitude, I'm kind of course, when I'm working, I don't think about the rest of the people. But every time I finish making a work, the history comes to me. The memory of certain things that I do remind me of some things that have gone on before, and how do I shift it? I don't think about shifting it forwards, because that's too. I mean, I find it a bit odd to say that I want to shift. For me, making art is almost like you have to be in the present, and you have to focus. And you have to look very carefully, and it's a kind of energy that is about containing a certain flow, and then at some point you stop, you take a break, And I think it's the same with writing. There's a kind of flow that happens once you zone into it, So I don't know whether I actually answered the question, but I think that whatever it is that you're doing, we don't work alone. I think it's important to understand that, and the sooner we understand that, then I think we can start to put things together that perhaps can point to a future.
Do you ever get glimpses of that future? what would be your best guesses about that, of that emerging aesthetic?
I don't know. I only had one experience of that when I was like when I came back from the UK from my studies. I remember I was on a plane. I was going to touchdown, and I was just wondering what kind of work that I will make, because I think for me, I feel that the environment actually changes the way you make your work. If I was living in Europe, I would make very different kind of paintings. And I truly believe that, because I have experience where even from moving from England to Spain, my work changes, because of the light. And immediately when I was about to touch down in Singapore, I had this vision of particles, lots of particles. That was it. But how I was going to make this happen, I do not know. But there was just this, multiplied things happening, which I don't get when I'm in another country. So that was the only thing that I have, experience that I have, of like that kind of envisioning. But usually, a lot of times, when I'm making a work, and if it happens, the work actually surprises me and shows me something that could be developed, and
And do you
honed.
think,
And it's really up to me whether I believe whether that can be developed.
is the changing, and you talk about the artwork being dependent on the environment within which it's made.
Yeah.
With the new technological or the evolving technological environment, do you see that world changing and consequently influencing the new aesthetic that might be around the corner?
Well, Alastair, I think that even before COVID, I think a lot of the younger generation are really borrowing a lot of the aesthetics from the screen, or rather the aesthetics of the haptic, the glitch. I mean, you hear that a lot in even paintings, But I'm interested in something else. I think we all kind of like understand that really, and how do we move and transit to the next stage? I think I feel that we are in transition right now, and actually, it's strangely I think we are in transition, and it'll be interesting to get a sense of how, when the gates start to open, when most of us can travel a bit more, I think that would change the way we put together, or rather we see, or we have a certain memory of this. Actually, for me, the memory of things past, is always something very attractive to human beings. I don't want to just use the term nostalgia. Also, nostalgia is only one. It's very it's like sentiment, But not all memories is like that, But it's about something that reminds you of a past and this. At this moment in time, in 3 or 4 years' time, it could be that could happen. That memory of the situation could happen, and perhaps that fabric of that memory could be a kind of can inform a new kind of aesthetic. Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah. I'm guessing.
Well, what else can we do? What else can we do? Can I ask you about the relationship between between creativity and craft? Because clearly, as a musician, you have had to learn how to play the bass guitar. You've had to, and when you're playing, you're aware of the craft of what chords are going on, what other people are doing melodically above you, and so that you can be technically appropriate in the supporting work that you do on the bass line. So there is craft as well as there is creativity. Do you have any ideas about how those two aspects, craft and creativity, interrelate in your work as an artist?
Well, as I mentioned early on about the opera singer that you mentioned about, I think all artists, we start off by learning the craft of developing that voice and it deals with methods and materials and virtuosity, a kind of technique, and then you produce things, and then at some point, I mean, these are basically rules that help you to sort of like sometimes make beautiful things, and that's another topic, the idea of aesthetics and beauty.
Yeah, beauty. Yeah.
But then at some point, as an artist, you do ask yourself, what you're gonna do with it, And there are some artists that they paint landscapes, and beautiful landscapes, and they're happy doing that, and they evolve doing that, and that's great, So I think you just need to find the kind of work you want to make, and then from there, you ask yourself the skills that you have, whether they are suitable for it. Actually, mind you, sometimes the limits of an artist, the fact that you can't do certain things or you're bad at doing certain things, make you develop something interesting. If you know how to reflect on that. I had a very good teacher when I was 21 years old, and he spent a year with us, and he had this thing where, he would look at your work and he would just spot things that were unique to you. And sometimes the things that were unique to you were not things that you were actually proud of, but they were habits. Habits, things that you repeat. And he was saying that, these habits, if you do it again and again, they become a craft and they become something that is unique to you. So to me, I learned about this idea of habits, how one can adopt them as to become a kind of it's also a kind of honest reflection of why you ended up doing that, and why does this thing appear in your work, So yeah, so that to me is a kind of idea of the idea of craft as that can be subverted, So it's not just about making things in a certain way, but later on, once you learn to do it, you learn to let it go. I mean, even in music, there is music that is freer than some other music. I use the word free, which I always have a bit of a problem with, but because I don't believe in this idea of freedom, maybe because I'm Singaporean. But freedom is what is freedom? I mean, what is this? And I used to listen to. I used to spend a couple of hours listening to this group of musicians in the UK, and they perform this music called free jazz. And it doesn't. I mean, it sounds a little bit like jazz, but it has its own thing, which is really much combining with ideas about noise and avant-garde classical music, but it's really trying to move away from jazz, But yeah, so anyway, the idea of freedom is an interesting thing, because actually you need to. It's not interesting. If freedom is not interesting unless you know the things that are constraining you, and you're working to subvert it.
Yeah. Obviously, as a musician myself, there are so many echoes in my own world from what you're saying about real freedom can only exist within constraints, even if they're self-imposed constraints. So Beethoven, a revolutionary composer, nevertheless still used classical sonata form to order the key structure of his music. So if we see those aspects as craft aspects, and that therefore the craft is an essential component to the creativity. They're not distinguishable in that sense. They are both necessary. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah, they are necessary, but I think that there's only so much one can hone their craft. And at some point, if you are not suitable to be a classical musician, then you better know as early as possible so that you can get on to something else. So that to me actually deals with this idea of the kind of the role that you play, And some people don't make abstract paintings because they are don't believe in it, and because they don't see themselves as taking on that role of reflecting, in the kind of a psychological inner way, But maybe I'm assuming as I'm talking like that, but I'm just reflecting from my own experience,
Yeah.
And and I go back to the idea of habits. Some people cannot deal with, cannot see. They see their habits and they get horrified by it, and they don't want to recognize it.
Yeah. Yeah. But you would see them as being markers of individuality and consequently things to be used as part of the creative process.
Yes, and it takes time for me to accept it sometimes. Sometimes I
Right.
cannot accept my own trauma and ugliness,
Yes.
Sometimes I negate my work. I negate, I can make something and then and it looks like it's done. I will negate it. Why am I doing that? People ask me, why you doing, making life so hard for yourself?
Yes.
Why do I cut my paintings up and then just throw them away? Because I need to do that because it is an action and that sort of like responds to my dissatisfactory and a kind of a test for myself. I see the work is actually asking me a question, and I cannot answer it. Maybe maybe I need more time to answer it. Maybe I have to do something really drastic. So it's that kind of relationship.
And if you did cut it up, would cutting it up become part of the artwork itself?
100% when I cut up a work and I throw it away, it's a revelation. I usually feel very relief, once I've done that, because the turmoil of me doing the same thing and sticking with it, I can start afresh with something else. And whatever I've learned from that, something would happen. I know that something will happen. I believe that something will happen. It doesn't happen in the next couple of months, it will happen in a year. It doesn't happen in a year, I will wait.
So failure, in inverted commas, is an essential aspect of subsequent success.
Yes, I think we kind of like, we all have glimpse of that, as
Yeah.
professionals. But a failure is hard sometimes. It's hard for us because when failure happens at the moment in time, I mean, failure is only beautiful and interesting when 10 years after, you talk
Yes.
about it. If you have survived it, failure is hard when you are dealing with it at the moment in time.
But essential for.
Essential. So as an artist, if I'm having a really bad day, you learn to put it aside,
Yes.
You do something else.
Yes.
Yeah, you do something else to try. I have different ways of doing different things so that, I can find some hope.
How do you cope more generally with criticism? Do you see, for example, if your work is commercially successful, does that make you feel better about it? Is commercial success more important than your own sense of subjective success or the admiration of colleagues, of other professionals?
I mean, the question that you asked, there are many different contexts and there are many different stages of an artist's life where certain things matter, and then later on they don't matter anymore. So if commercial success is new to you, I think it's important because it's also a kind of recognition in the professional world.
Yeah.
Of course, commercial success means a lot of different things for different artists, and the idea of who judges, who compares your work with, the benchmark, it's really about the benchmark. I think it's very important. I mean, to answer this question, I think it's very important to always surround yourself with artists that are as interesting, that have similar interests, different interests, but that strive for the kind of energy that you strive for. And it's good to basically hang out with these people, to be in that environment, because that environment of being with them also allows yourself to get used to someone not liking what you do. Openings are, I'm just going to combine this to the commercial aspect and criticism, the art world, and then the different kinds of the art world. So I hate openings. I have a solo show. I hate openings. I always hated it. I've learned to, to deal with it as time goes by. But I hate to do it. I hate it because, of course, in COVID, it's a bit different right now. But in openings, you have many people will come, and there are artists that you respect, artists that you want to get away from. You can't have a conversation with. There is the dealers, different kinds of dealers, and then there are like collectors. They're all very different kinds of audiences, and then you have yourself to deal with. And so all these things create a lot of mix. It's a bit of a strange storm that happens that you need to try to contain it. So you choose to say some things and you choose not to say some things. Yeah. And then artists that talk to you, of course, they can be nice to you during the opening, and then they can write a bad review, or if they're critics on a separate day. So all these things, you need to get used to it, and it has to happen to every artist. Having a bad review, which which I have had, in magazines, comparing me with another artist, and I get a not so good review, and the other artist gets a better review, and the ego is being what they call it, distress. There's a bit of distress happening to it, and then you start to question yourself. But all these things are great because they really are things where they test you in terms of, are you going to continue making this kind of work? If you really believe in it, you continue making it. Yeah, you will not be swayed. You will not be swayed. So there are two sides to the coin. At the same time, it's good to hear the criticism. And at some point, maybe it's not so good to hear it. Maybe you hear it after a period of time. And many artists have gone through these situations. Yeah. And it's very much part and parcel. Yeah.
So you're suggesting that you're in fact not solo when you're being an artist. You have not only the ghosts of the past and other artists who've been working in the same tradition, but you're also surrounded by voices commenting on your art, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, including your own voice.
Yeah, that's terrible. It sounds terrible, isn't it?
Why is that terrible?
I mean, John Cage had this very famous quote that he talked about how when you start painting in the studio, you have all these voices that you just talked about.
Yes.
And the ideal situation is when all these voices disappear, including your own voice.
Really? So it's sort of a transcendental moment of certainty. What do you think?
Yeah.
Gosh, that would be a nice. Do you ever achieve that moment?
I think that moment, again, it happens in an artist certain times. It cannot happen all the time, because if it happens all the time, I don't think it can happen all the time. It happens. Yeah, it happens once in a while, I think. And I can't assume anything, but maybe John Cage is telling a lie. Maybe he just said it, so that we all can think about it. And
yes,
artists are great at telling lies.
Especially,
we are fiction
especially
makers,
to themselves, perhaps.
Yeah, we are fiction makers.
Right. Yes. Well. Yeah. Courageous.
Picasso talked about the beautiful lie.
Yes. Do you ever worry that your creativity might go?
I'm a visual. Yeah. So I did think about, if I went blind, right? Well, I got music. To hold back on, and then maybe I could write poetry. I mean, that's the only thought that came by me. Yeah. I don't think creativity goes away. I think our bodies might cease to do things and that goes back to craft,
Yes.
But it depends whether you are stubborn enough to find different ways to carry on with the same kind of work you make, or you just shift vocation. It's just,
So you're saying that, if you went blind, your music would, the music would still be there. And so
maybe I'll write a novel. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. So your creativity is kind of innate and separate from the particular craft that expresses it. You have a fundamental Ian Wu creative person, which can be expressed through a variety of different mediums.
Yeah. You used my name just early on, Ian Wu, that, and it's almost like a kind of like a stamp that you are kind of like a branding.
Yes, that's what I was using.
And it's hard. It's a bit. I think it's that's. Thank you very much. That sounds like a compliment. But at the same time, for me, early on when you talk about the idea of working with the community or the history of things that have passed and moving to the present and then moving ahead, I always think about making art as arranging things.
As what? Sorry,
arranging things.
Yeah.
You're just putting things here, putting things there, front, backwards, inserting one box onto another. Although we always, in management talk, they always say, what's this term they always say? You need to get out of the box, And I always reply saying that, oh, I love boxes,
Yes.
Because we all live in boxes, one box after another. So the sooner you realize it, the better it is. So to me, this idea of just shifting things around, and I think this also deals with the response to about the idea of the future aesthetic. I think we are constantly just shifting things that have manifested as time passes. And as a visual artist, you are shifting images, you're cropping images, you're trying to streamline a new vision, And that with musicians, you're dealing with the same thing, and you're just trying to again streamline a new sonic palette, with things that have existed before. So to me, the idea of originality is this way of shifting perspectives, and perspectives is some people. I mean, the more elusive you allow it to be, I think the better it is, so that you can be surprised by it.
Surprised and playful with it.
I think playful with it. Yes.
Yeah. Because what you were saying, using the idea of music, musicians are rearranging notes because we're using the same notes as Beethoven or Bach used. We're putting them in different orders. We're rearranging them. And the thought that came to my mind when you were talking about rearranging things is that fine art, you're describing fine art as a kind of a miniature version of interior design, where the skill comes in the positioning, the juxtaposition of objects.
Yeah, or ideas,
Yes, or ideas.
Or conceptual, you're dealing with ideas. And what I wanted to say also, don't forget, it's not just the arrangement of things, it's also emptiness, the idea of void. Yes. The idea of void is changing all the time, Yes. We all know that voids we think it's empty, but at some point it is not, So these things, how we use this, how we use something and nothing, how in music, this is how it's durational,
duration,
or filmmaking. It's
silence.
Silence is durational. Yeah. Of course, silence is a problematic word, which is why I said the void is, actually, there's something there, Yeah. So that dualism of this idea of something and nothing is part of this idea of how we are all involved in putting things together, and sometimes you just need to have periods where there is nothing happening, which goes back to the idea of waiting.
Yes.
And then the right moment, something happens.
presumably on a
Yeah.
larger scale, this must have implications for the way you like your exhibitions to be hung, because the movement of the eye from one work to another and the space between works is presumably very important to you.
Yeah, I think more and more, not just myself, a lot of curators have been talking about this in terms of how to rethink ideas of exhibition making.
Yeah.
In fact, the exhibition that you just told me early on about with STPI, I had very good conversations with the artists as well as the curator Mark Gaudet, and we talked about the idea of different ways of experimenting with bouts of space before you arrive at another work.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the question about the void and silence.
Well, I think a huge thank you, Ian. Thank you for talking today. I found this conversation explosively interesting in my mind, with so many ideas and so many aspects of creativity relating to the craft, relating to space, relating to time, relating to gravity, relating to organization. It's just an extraordinary confluence of ideas and practical expression of those ideas.
Thank you.
But blimey, you have some complicated ideas to express.
Well, art is complicated.
Art is, well,
I think creativity is complicated.
It certainly is. It certainly is. And so, there is an argument for saying we shouldn't actually be talking about it. We should just be doing it. Because it's actually more.
Actually, my entire interview, you can sense that I was about to say that, but I didn't want to do that. But I'm just getting on with let's get on with the work,
Get on with the work because that's how artists communicate. You communicate through your craft rather than through the abstract ideas that lie behind it.